I'm the Evening Standard editor, Emily Sheffield, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Tony Blair, Executive Chairman of the Institute for Global Change and former Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Mr Blair is the only Labour leader in the party's 100-year history to win 3 consecutive elections between 1997 and 2007. He has spent most of his time since leaving office working on 3 areas: supporting governments to deliver effectively for their people, working for peace in the Middle East, countering extremism, and establishing the not-for-profit organisation, the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. Mr Blair, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
You've become something of a public sage this year. You've been praised endlessly for your smart ideas and advice on the government's handling of the crisis. You're an early proponent of giving more people first doses of the vaccine, which the government then took on. You've advised Matt Hancock on the rollout, and you've also been advising the need for COVID passports, which the government are now taking seriously. Your institute, which in March last year you dedicated your entire staff, 200 members, to working on how to support global leaders in the handling of this crisis. Why have you felt the need to speak up and help out?
It's the biggest crisis that governments have ever faced, really, in terms of the practical business of governing. I mean, it's a logistical crisis, it's a crisis for the economy, for health. And so if you're interested in government, what the Institute does is it basically uses the lessons I learned in government. 10 years in government, you learn a lot. And we help governments around the world implement programs of change, particularly in Africa and the Middle East, but also elsewhere. And this is if you want the biggest example of effective government or not making a difference, it's this crisis. So we repurposed the Institute, the policy side of it, to work on this.
Now, how long did that take you? Was this something you made a sort of snap decision in March?
Yeah, we did actually. And then the people who were working on other things just got into the detail. Yeah. And one of the advantages when you're outside of government, when you're inside government, there's so many things happening every single day, and you've got events and crises, and then you've got the normal run of politics. So it's been easier for me to take a step back and say, well, what are the big strategic things you need to get right?
And how, in terms of approaching the government, obviously you ran a Labour government, there's now a Tory government, how do you go about making those advances, I suppose, to someone like Matt Hancock to say, look, I'm here to help, what can I do?
I mean, people are perfectly open to that.
Yeah.
I mean, whoever is in power is going to be facing the same issues. Yeah. So it's not really a party political question at all. It's really a matter of trying to work out what you need to do.
Yeah.
And, what was very clear to me very early on was that the only way out was going to be vaccination. So you had to have a really effective vaccination program. Once it became clear that, particularly with AstraZeneca, the second dose is most effective 10 or 12 weeks after the first dose, there's no point in holding back the doses because you'll be replenishing them as you go. And then I think with the COVID passports, I mean, I know there's a lot of anxiety around them, but I just think it's inevitable for international travel for sure. Yeah. This is going to happen because people are already demanding proof of negative tests. Yeah. So they're obviously going to ask for proof of vaccination. Yeah. But I also think that we will find in people's daily lives that to have a clear and verifiable record of your vaccination and probably of your tests, it will become important in a lot of parts of our life, whether we like it or not.
I think some of the issues around COVID passports that we've been discussing in the Evening Standard is, once we're all vaccinated, why would you need a passport? But what appears to be emerging, and we'll get onto this a bit later, is that this crisis isn't ending in September.
No, I think the most important thing to realise is that we're in a new world. And one of the things that we will produce soon is trying to set out the different things government should be doing now to prepare for this new world. Yeah. So, we are going to have to build the capacity to vaccinate the entire world fast, because these global pandemics, we're not out of this one, and we may well have new variants because a large part of the world's not vaccinated. And what happens with these variants is that they gestate within an individual. So you can have a situation where someone has COVID and they are within their own body, a new variant of concern is emerging. Now, just in the last few weeks, there've probably been hundreds of different variants in India alone. Now, most of those are insignificant, but you only need one of them to be significant and you could have a problem. So you're going to have to get to the point where you're able to identify new variants or new pandemics, work out what are the vaccines that are going to be effective, manufacture them and distribute them in a really short space of time. And that's a vast effort, and that's why the world's got to come together and do that.
And with India right now, the government is saying that they're sending equipment over, which I assume is PPE, ventilators, maybe even doctors to help. What else? What about genome sequencing? Do they have the capacity? My understanding is this: if COVID is raging there right now, a new variant could pop up at any moment, as you say, as it did here in Britain. Is there other expertise that we should be sending over there right this second?
Well, I think the most important thing is to realise that data and getting access to good data fast is one of the huge lessons of this crisis. And I mean, I've become mildly obsessive about the need to have data systems that share information in common. And so one of the things we'll be suggesting soon is that you need a cloud-based genomic surveillance data system which allows you to absorb all the different data from different countries and have it readily accessed and available. I mean, even the United States doesn't really have a great genomic surveillance system. We've got quite a good one here in this country. There are other countries that do have it, but no one brings it all together fast, because that's what you need to do. So with India, I mean, they do have some capability, and of course they've got one of the largest, probably the world's largest vaccine manufacturer, Serum Institute in India. But they're going to need to get people vaccinated, and then yes, they're going to need to make sure that there's proper surveillance of the different cases so that we can spot a variant when it arises and deal with it fast.
Because whatever, and you make this point in your paper, The New Necessary, How We Future-Proof for the Next Pandemic. Whatever happens over there is soon going to be happening over here. It doesn't matter if we close our borders, that's proved not to work, only to a certain extent. And anyway, we can't carry on functioning as a global economy, closing our borders the whole time.
No, absolutely. So this is the key thing. So in Israel right now, they have opened back up their economy. They are, by the way, using vaccine certification as a means of doing that, and it's highly effective. But they can't really open their borders. I mean, China has been effectively shut down for a long period of time and will probably stay that way. So, they're able to control the disease inside their borders, and obviously it's a very powerful state in China. Yeah. But if you're going to open the world back up again, then you've got to make sure the entire world's vaccinated. Yeah. And the big risk is that you end up with countries, and this is because we work so much with African governments, my anxiety is that you're going to have countries essentially kind of isolated from the world because they don't have the capacity to vaccinate their people.
And certainly not do things like introduce COVID passports and...
No, absolutely. But then one of the things that's going to be really important with these COVID passports, which, as I say, for international travel for sure is going to happen, is that you're going to have a verifiable system of data which allows you to be sure that if someone says, look, here's the QR code on my phone that says I've been vaccinated, you need to know that's verifiable, because otherwise people are going to say, someone turns up with a piece of paper, they'll say, well...
And it's not going to be we've got a different system to another country.
How do we know it's real? So, one of the things that really has emerged from this is the need for great data systems. Yeah. And I think we're still not, I don't think even in this country we've got the data systems right yet.
No. Just to move to a bit of, I suppose, personal detail, we've all gone through something, huge this last year. And obviously some people have suffered more, they've lost someone in their family, they've been locked up in a tiny flat or lost their job. I think it's going to take us all a very long time to look back and process, I suppose, what's happened. But how have you managed? You travelled hugely before, incredibly busy man, former Prime Minister. From everything I've heard, you don't stop, and you've been forced to be in one place for a year. How have you and the family coped?
Well, here, we're in the countryside. And it's we're very lucky actually. The travel I'm kind of ambivalent about because I was traveling a lot, and it can be very tiring. And it's been I haven't been unhappy to be in one place. I've quite enjoyed that, and we were able to work very effectively. I mean, we switched to remote working, and I think this is interesting because you've got two groups of employees. One group that can switch very easily to working by Zoom or Teams, and the others which can't. And that's obviously going to be a huge challenge for the future. But for us, it's been relatively easy. And we've actually expanded as an institute in the course of the last year. Actually, we've now got more than 300 people working for us. And we've been able to build our capacity also in other countries, and I've been able to interact with the teams there relatively easily. So, but I think what I've found is that the two problems with remote working are, first of all, if you've got new people coming into your organization, it's weird to have them as key people and you're not meeting them physically. And secondly, I think if you're discussing really sensitive questions, it's difficult.
Yeah. And what about, what have you done as a family, I suppose? We haven't been able to see anyone. Have you missed that interaction with other humans?
Yeah, of course.
How did you stay sane?
Well, I don't know if we go too deeply into that one, but no, it's been, I mean, apart from the fact that I haven't had a haircut, which this is happening
and it's definitely
imminently.
The longest I've ever seen your hair.
I know, it's ridiculous. It's not been this long since I was in a rock band. That was a long time ago.
Talking about the pandemic can obviously lead to a lot of quite sort of depressing questions, I suppose, and challenges. But do you think there'll be any long-term positives from what we've just gone through?
Yes, I think there will be some long-term positives because I think we have had to accelerate the use of technology, which will help us. And my basic belief is the single biggest challenge. If you're back in politics today, I would be spending my entire time really in terms of big strategic issues, looking at the technology revolution, how it's going to change the world and how we adapt to it. And I think we tend to look at technology as a threat often, but it's a massive opportunity. And for example, these messenger RNA vaccines, I mean, the technology surrounding that in the future can offer us the opportunity to tackle many of the big diseases. We have gone from very few people doing GP consultations remotely to virtually it all happening remotely. I think there are great opportunities, but there's immense challenges, but it's all part of the same thing, which is the technology revolution. I think the other thing is that it should reinforce the need for global cooperation. I mean, it didn't in the early stages of the pandemic, and even now, I don't think there's the degree of global working together there should be, because everything would be easier to resolve if we were working better together.
What did you think of the EU's response recently to the vaccination crisis?
Well, it's just been it's been a bit of a shocker, I'm afraid. And look, I'm totally anti-Brexit and always have been, and I believe there are very strong reasons for the existence of the European Union. But it was a mistake to hand the purchasing of the vaccines over to the Commission. They should have left it with the member states, which is where it started and was quite successful. But the USA and the UK, we put it in the hands of people who are experts in the area, and that's the best thing to do with something like this.
But even their response didn't seem that great.
No, I mean, it's been difficult.
I was quite shocked.
It's been difficult, and you've had, I'm afraid, statements by some of the political leaders that have been unhelpful to vaccination. So you've got a situation in France right now where 75% of the AstraZeneca vaccines are not being used. Now, I mean, they will...
And not trusted.
Yeah, hopefully over time. But you've got majorities in France, Italy and Germany, not trusting the AstraZeneca vaccine. And that is just absurd because it's an extremely effective vaccine. And that is absolutely clear from the data.
I still get people saying to me now, what have you had? And I go, I've had AstraZeneca. And they're like, I'm I'm hoping for Pfizer. And I'm like, what does it matter? Can you try and explain, because you've talked about this only recently, as AstraZeneca as being the workhorse. Why does it matter that we have these workhorse vaccines? And what do you mean by the workhorse vaccine?
I mean the vaccines which are more traditional technology and which are cheaper and easier to administer, and therefore will be the workhorse vaccines for the world. So the two big vaccines that the world needs are AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. Yeah. They're both adenovirus vaccines. They're both highly effective. Yeah. And you know, Pfizer and Moderna, which are the messenger RNA ones, that's a new type of vaccine. They're more expensive. They are extremely good vaccines, but we don't yet know. The data we've got so far tells us that both groups of vaccines are very effective. I mean, so are, by the way, Sputnik is an effective vaccine. Yeah. Sinopharm's an effective vaccine. You've got Novavax that's coming down the track reasonably soon.
Last summer, your institute published your roadmap for recovery, which addressed the multiple challenges of restoring public trust, confidence and clarity to government guidelines that were then fairly complicated. How do you think the more recent response has been by the government? Do you feel the government is beginning, as time goes on, to get more of a grip on how to handle stuff?
Yeah, no, obviously, you know, the government learns from the experience of the first lockdown. I just think it's important now to make provision for whatever may happen in the future, so that we're prepared for any eventuality. Now, it looks like, you know, once people are vaccinated, it will have a significant difference, obviously. But it's important to understand that there will still be cases of COVID, even after you've been vaccinated. It's just that they will be dramatically reduced.
Yeah. And how do you think the government messaging, is right now? I feel like it's a very delicate balance between restoring confidence so we go out and spend, but reminding us this isn't going away. And we probably had a bit too much confidence from the current PM in the beginning.
Yeah, I think let's see how, it should all be around, you know, what the data tell us. But if it's anything like what has happened in Israel, which is probably Israel, UAE maybe, are about the only examples of countries where there's such a large proportion of the population vaccinated that it's possible they've achieved something like herd immunity. And the data from Israel particularly is very promising.
Good.
So
we should feel hopeful.
We should feel hopeful. Subject to a new and completely different variant arising, we should feel hopeful. But I think it will be important that the government should at least facilitate the holding of the data individually that you've been vaccinated. Yeah. I was talking to one of the heads of the cruise lines a couple of months ago, and he was saying to me that with these big cruise ships, they've polled their customers, and their customers say to them, "We're not coming on the ship unless we know everyone else has been vaccinated, and the crew." So the point is, whether government mandates this or not, consumers themselves and businesses, because of consumers, are going to demand it. Yeah. And therefore, the government should at least, I think, be giving people the ability to carry with them. If you look in Israel or the UAE, for example, you on your phone, you will have your vaccination. When you had it, it's done on a verifiable database so that you know it's real, plus whatever negative tests you've got.
Keir Starmer has said they are against that past COVID status certificates are against British instinct, but we just polled Londoners and they were pretty keen on them. So do we think some of our basic instincts have changed? The pandemic has changed us.
I think people are very practical about something like this. If they think it's your passport to get out and
spend money
and be more free, I think they'll think, well, do it. But I also think we've got to realise that, if you're thinking about your own workplace, for example, do you really not care if the people you're working with have been vaccinated, not vaccinated, tested, not tested? No, of course you care. Yeah. So I think it's not that you want to be intrusive with people,
or force them.
Yeah, but on the other hand,
encourage them.
Well, on the other hand, especially, maybe it's different between different age groups, but if you're an older person and you want to go somewhere, you probably, you prefer not to get COVID, right?
At the G7, what would be your ideal outcome from the leaders attending? What would be For you, what would be the sort of biggest thing those leaders could come out with? But I mean, something concrete, not just words, something concrete.
So the two things that I would really drive for if I was them is, number one, this genomic surveillance database, so that you're spotting variants much faster, because that can be organised if you want to do it. And secondly, I think we should vaccinate the world in 2021 if we can. Yeah. But that will need repurposing of bioreactor capacity to make more vaccine. And it will need probably some new construction, but most of all, it will need, remember, only around 25% of the vaccine making capacity in the world presently is being used for COVID vaccine. So, getting the world vaccinated fast, that is essentially what, the big countries should try and organize. I mean, America should just keep going with manufacturing vaccine.
We've just cut our aid budget. Do you think aid budgets should be repurposed for the next year or so to help vaccinate?
Absolutely. We should be doing everything we can to help countries with the...
Do you think we should put that aid budget back up again?
Well, I was never in favour of cutting it. So obviously I'm because I think it's also, at this moment in time, it's very important for the country. I mean, you're trying to build new relationships, particularly post-Brexit. So I think it's important, but we have a massive interest in the world getting vaccinated.
Huge.
Yeah. So, but these are two very concrete things the G7 could do. And I think if I was Boris Johnson, I would focus on those specific things.
Those two things.
Yeah, because I think, everything else is, long term and so on, but we've actually got two very short-term problems because we're not out of this pandemic.
No.
And I think, a year ago, I think most people thought you'd have a lockdown. Yeah. We'd then ease ourselves from lockdown when we brought down the disease. Yeah. We'd keep measures of containment, and then we'd vaccinate at leisure. And what's really happened with the new variants is that has
blown that up.
Yeah, it's completely annihilated that strategy all around the world.
Yeah.
And so...
And again, we can see what's happening in India.
Right, so you're in a rush today to vaccinate. Yeah. And it's not just India too now. It's, you look at the Philippines, and these are big population countries.
And this is where you also set out in this report the new necessary, and I assume this is up somewhere, we can read it all, but I do suggest people read it, is that we should try and get to the point where we get new vaccinations out in 100 days, which seems like a staggering target to meet.
Yeah, but it's, one of the things that I learned talking to people who I'm not an expert, but talking to people who are experts, is that, and I hadn't really appreciated this, we had many near misses in the last decade. And apparently what is happening is, as a result of the way the world works today, travel, migration, globalization, but also changes in biodiversity, your likelihood of pandemics is hugely increased. But you can't afford to go back into a situation with a fresh pandemic and have it last for 2 years.
No.
You can't do that.
I mean, you make the point in here very clearly and multiple times, and the people have put this report, experts have put this report together, it's not if, it's when. And therefore...
That's what they say, and I think...
We have to be prepared, better prepared.
Yeah, I mean, put it like this, for the money you've spent on dealing with the outcome of the pandemic, for a fraction of that money, you can build protection for the future. Yeah. But it means you have to identify the disease very fast, the pandemic very fast, or the pathogen very fast. You've got to identify it fast. You've got to then have expedited work on a collaborative basis to find the right vaccine, and you've got to manufacture and distribute it. But 100 days sounds absurdly fast, but if you think about
how quickly we did actually come up with a vaccine.
Yeah, remember we've had all of the vaccines. This time last year, you could tell what were the 8 or 10 vaccines that were going to work. And that's one of the things we should have been doing last year at this time, is repurposing capacity to build more vaccine.
Yeah, to produce more vaccines ourselves. The National Institute of Health Production, which is the government's new organisation to deal with urgent work for prepping on the future. Yeah. And you talk about that in here. It all, at some point, yes, comes down to leadership and focus, but also funding. In the recent budget, there were quite a lot of complaints that there wasn't enough post-pandemic money put aside. Do you, and we are, as you say, we have been spending vast quantities of money like we've never seen before.
I don't know. I find that difficult to judge, actually.
But it should be a focus, no?
Of course, yeah.
And it should be properly financed.
Of course. I mean, that's obvious. But I kind of assume it is obvious. So I don't know. I mean, you'd have to talk to people who have studied what is necessary to do. But I mean, I'd be surprised if the government didn't set aside the money for this. Because
whatever it needed. Yeah. Looking back, Boris Johnson was a new Prime Minister. And this is one of the biggest things any Prime Minister would have to. You had 10 years of experience. So I'm not asking this question for you to criticise the current Prime Minister. But you had 10 years experience as a Prime Minister. Looking back, what would you have done differently? Or would you not?
No, I think I would have done the types of things that we've been suggesting from the Institute, and
but
probably
the speed
lock down.
Of reaction, I suppose.
I'd lock down harder and faster, because I think that definitely worked. I mean, the thing is, what happens over your 10 years is you learn a lot. You know, in my second term, we set up something that I think Boris Johnson is now bringing back, which is called the delivery unit, where we got into a different way of governing, which was to treat it much more not as a political thing, but as a sort of science almost. And I think it's unfortunate that the government was a very new government, because once you've been in government for some years, and it's a difficult thing to say to the public, because they assume that every Prime Minister comes in with all the knowledge that they have.
And Cameron had dealt with SARS, so they understood.
Yeah, so you're in a new government, new situation, completely unprecedented. And so it's not surprising mistakes were made, but this would have been tough, whoever was in power,
Would you have missed 5 emergency COBRA meetings, though?
Now, people always ask me, surely you went to all the COBRA meetings, and I honestly can't remember. I mean, I think I would have gone. The whole point about COBRA is it's an emergency, right? So if it's an emergency, the Prime Minister will be there. But I guess there will have been occasions when I missed them. I can't remember. We established COBRA, I think. It was really, we used it in a different way. For the purpose of it is to bring together all the players across government, because otherwise things get siloed in departments, and the purpose is just to give you an enormous sort of focus.
And focus. What do you think the London mayors, I mean, you've lived in the capital a long time, obviously, when you were Prime Minister, what do you think the London mayors' priorities are for the capital as we emerge from this crisis?
So I think it's a really important, I mean, I think London will have a bigger challenge post-COVID than at any time in its recent history, because it's going to be hugely affected by people moving out of London. I mean, I know a lot of people moved out of London because they believe they will be working more remotely in the future. You've got the city and the finance sector post-Brexit. You've got huge problems with retail. So a lot of retail is going to be changed forever, bricks and mortar retail. And yet you've got still a very high cost of living. So I think the mayor's got to concentrate on crime, really important, housing, transport, but this post-COVID recovery and making sure London comes together in a good way. It's still, I think the greatest capital city on earth. I think it's still got enormous innate strengths, but it's going to be challenged.
Where do you think we will be this time next year, both globally and actually as a city?
I mean, I'm optimistic that this time next year, subject to there being a new variant the vaccines are not effective against, I'm optimistic that we will be back to, it will be a new normal, it will be a different normal, but we will be back to something that is more like normal life. And I think how we are this time next year for the rest of it depends on what provision we make now. But I think the sensible thing is to make sure we have in place the infrastructure that is capable of dealing with anything that is either unexpected or is something we desperately hope won't happen but might happen. And we've got to build that infrastructure of containment and capability now.
And just to finish on a more personal question for you, as we started this, go back to your advice has been widely taken. You have felt like a wise voice in this pandemic. You've said at times that the ferocious eye and of the media and everything, of the constant running of emergencies you're dealing with when you're Prime Minister, have you found, I suppose, a period of contentment or a role? I mean, you've had lots of roles since leaving office,
Yeah,
but
no, it's
for you personally, where do you see yourself in a year, I suppose?
I don't know. I mean, we're building the institute up and its capability. It's taken me a long time to do it, but we're now quite a large organisation, as I say, north of 300 people, in about 30 different countries in the world. I mean, I'm just going to carry on doing what I'm doing, but I'm one of these restless people. I'm never really satisfied, so it's contentment is not my natural disposition.
This certainly has dealing with this pandemic and afterwards certainly has long legs on it, doesn't it? This isn't going to be
no. And it's both a fascinating challenge and an important one. And if you're interested in the difference politics done well can make, then it's
a vital issue.
It's a great thing to do.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mr. Blair, for joining us today.
Thanks, Emily. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Good luck with the haircut.
Yeah, no, it's definitely necessary. There's going to be a lot of hair on the floor.